Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 7 of my series discussing the Star Trek versus Star Wars debate. This part will discuss the tactical side of the debate. I'll reiterate that this is the Star Trek Federation, as of the Dominion War, versus the Galactic Empire, as of the Return of the Jedi. Unfortunately, with this section, I can't really put numbers on most of this discussion, as tactics are an inherently intellectual exercise, and every tactic is effective or ineffective in relation to the tactics in use by the opposition. So, for example, back in ancient times, the Persian Empire used overwhelming numbers to great effect to conquer much of the world, but then 300 Spartans and a few thousand Athenians managed to hold off 1,000,000 soldiers for several days by utilizing their significant terrain and training advantage. All that to say, I'll try to summarize Federation and Empire tactics as a whole as best as I can, but then I'll also follow up with examples of brilliant tactical work on both sides. For the Empire, tactics seem to be generally awful, with some pretty notable exceptions. This seems to be because many command positions are awarded based on nepotism rather than merit. Take Admiral Ozzel from Empire Strikes Back. His approach to wipe out the rebels at Hoth was to jump the fleet super close to the planet to try and surprise the rebels, and then land ground forces and destroy the base. Darth Vader rightly calls this stupid and proceeds to choke him to death. If Ozzel had not done this and instead jumped into the system farther from the planet so the rebels couldn't detect the massive energy surge from the fleet leaving hyperspace, the rebels wouldn't have had their shields up, and then the whole ground assault thing wouldn't have happened, and they just would have bombarded the base from orbit, taking out the shields, ion cannon, and any exposed transports in minutes, instead of marching AT-AT walkers slowly over to the base while losing valuable military hardware. Contrast this with the Federation, who has absolutely suffered significant defeats, but typically for very different reasons. At the Battle of Wolf 359, where the Federation lost 39 ships and about 11,000 people trying to fight a single Borg cube, the Federation had a significant numerical advantage and got thoroughly thrashed anyway. Another loss was at the start of the Dominion War, when the Federation lost the battle for Deep Space Nine, a key strategic point because it was guarding the Bajoran wormhole, the gateway that let the Dominion receive reinforcements from the Gamma Quadrant. In both of these cases, the Federation was hilariously outmatched by their enemies. Despite outnumbering the Borg at Wolf 359, the Borg won easily because they had gained tactical knowledge about Federation ships, defenses, and weapons by first assimilating Captain Picard, and had thus adapted, countering every last Federation asset before they could even be used. The cube just was incapable of taking damage from the fleet at that point. The battle for Deep Space Nine was one space station against uncounted hundreds of Dominion and Cardassian vessels, and was an easy victory against the Federation. Kinda. You see, the Federation Admiralty realized that they didn't really have a shot at winning that particular fight against the overwhelmingly powerful and numerous Dominion forces, so they used the opportunity to strike 3 major blows to the Dominion. First, they deployed a fleet to Taros 3 and proceeded to destroy the ships and shipyards there, crippling the Dominion ability to rearm and repair the vessels. They also successfully deployed a minefield of invisible self-replicating mines at the entrance of the wormhole, denying the Dominion the access to the reinforcements that they were so desperate to get. And finally, third, when the Federation finally did surrender Deep Space Nine, they ran software that did so much damage to the station systems that it was rendered nearly useless for months. Basically, my takeaway regarding the tactics on each side amount to this. For the Empire, it's the Wolverine philosophy, what if I just hit it real hard? For the Federation, it's more like, we've been hit, let's talk about it for a minute and then decide what to do. Sometimes just hitting something pretty hard is really effective as a tactics, it's true. But in terms of limiting losses or exploiting weaknesses, a much more deliberate approach, while slower, can be much more effective. So now let's look at a couple examples of tactical geniuses in each universe. I'm going to steer away from Clone Wars for a couple reasons. One, it's technically pre-Empire, and second, some of the more clever maneuvers just happen to actually be war crimes. I'll link in the description of video by another producer who lists a few. Starting with the Empire again, I'll branch out from the movies a little and talk about Grand Admiral Thrawn. This guy is the pinnacle of tactical genius in Star Wars, not just in the Empire. He studies his opponents closely and is insightful to the point where he appears to know what they're going to do before they even do it. While still a lieutenant, he fought a battle over the planet Umbara against a swarm of hundreds of Clone War-era vulture droids, and by closely observing their behavior and keeping track of when their behavior switched from being centrally coordinated and thus smart to operating on baseline programming alone, he was able to triangulate the location of the transmitter that was coordinating the droids into a coherent fighting force. He was then able to destroy that transmitter, despite his commander thinking that there was no way he could have possibly figured this out, and turned that swarm of droid fighters into a collection of overly aggressive, foolhardy fighters that were easily picked off by the Imperial task force. His feats of quick thinking are nothing compared to when he has time to prepare, though. Again, that guy has got so good at learning the culture and tendencies of his enemies that he seems prophetic. Part of what Thrawn's expertise does, though, unfortunately, is highlight just how awful most Imperial commanders really are. That thing he did where figuring out where the transmitter was located, yeah, that's called triangulation. GPS does it all the time to help people navigate. And yet, to the Imperial captain over then Lieutenant Thrawn, it was considered to be voodoo that was totally impossible. Just look at how the Empire fights. They show up with whatever ships are involved, fly up next to their enemy ship, and just start blasting away broadside as if they're in a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Meanwhile, they launch their TIE fighters and bombers to wreak more havoc. Undeniably, this is effective, and they bring a ton of firepower to bear very efficiently, but they've demonstrated repeatedly a total lack of imagination and situational awareness. For example, in Empire Strikes Back, the Millennium Falcon was being chased down by one Star Destroyer, and then 2 other Star Destroyers came to cut them off. Han did the brilliant maneuver of flying quote-unquote down, and the 3 ships that were trying to cut them off rammed each other. It's as if they're being commanded by the 3 Stooges. Thrawn may be an undeniable tactical genius, but it's hard to say how brilliant he actually is because the rest of the commanders are really, really bad. It's pretty easy to seem brilliant when you're surrounded by morons. As for Star Trek, the only really noted tactical genius I can think of who actually had any combat experience was Garth the Vizar, who really only shows up in 1 episode of the original series, and he was a mental patient at the time, so I'll have to go with the various main character captains and what they've done over the course of their series. I'll instead talk about Captain Picard, the quintessential gentleman and scholar captain. With him, combat never involved just flying in guns blazing unless there was a Borg cube involved, and even then, lots of planning would happen before a single shot was fired. Perhaps his greatest tactical advantage is his ability to research his opponents and take advantage of weaknesses in their offensive and defensive capabilities, or to just use the capabilities of his own ship in creative ways. My favorite example of this technical mastery is the Picard maneuver. In a fight against a Ferengi marauder, Picard, then command of the Stargazer, not the Enterprise, was in real danger of being killed, as the Ferengi ship seemed to be more than a match to his own. On the fly, he came up with the idea of going to warp for a split second, closing only part of the distance between both ships, but because he was traveling faster than light to a closer position, for a split second, the Stargazer appeared to be in 2 places at once to the Ferengi ship, which then proceeded to mistakenly fire upon where the Stargazer used to be, allowing Picard the time to strike a killing blow. A lot of the tactical capabilities of the Federation come down to the fact that they're generally very deliberate about thinking through possible courses of action when the bridge crew discusses ways of dealing with the problems that come up. Even when massively outgunned and taking damage, it's clear that the command staff are constantly thinking of ways to level the field or gain an advantage. Rarely is the solution just to fly up and hit something really hard. Unfortunately, this think first, fire later mentality can also cause problems. In first contact situations with hostile forces, the Federation is almost never the one to fire first. And this hesitancy can absolutely cause a lot of unnecessary damage and loss of life, as the hostile aliens they're encountering demonstrate a complete disinterest in being friends and attempt to blow up the Federation ship. So, there you go. You've got some examples of general tactics on both sides and examples of brilliant tactics and generalized tactics on both sides. So, how do you think this will affect the overall matchup? Well, you'll just have to check out the rest of the series to see what I think about that question, but in the meantime, what do you think of all this? Did I skip over something I shouldn't have? Are my conclusions totally wrong? Please comment below, and until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.